Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. When you think about great leadership, what qualities come to mind? 3 qualities are consistently at the top of my list: integrity, the ability to think flexibly, and the desire to serve others to the best of one's ability. My guest on this episode is the embodiment of all 3. Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen is the elected Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the 6th largest county in California with a population of 1.8 million people. He was elected to the position in 2010, and his philosophy of leadership and justice is informed by truly diverse sources that he will unpack during this interview. Jeff also shares his life hacks and habits that allow him to cultivate his mind and to care for his body so that he can give the people the best he has to offer. And for those of us who don't serve as high-profile elected officials, we can still apply his best practices to our own lives. So listen in as Jeff and I have a lively and informative discussion about leading with an open mind. District Attorney Jeff Rosen, who has asked me to call him Jeff, welcome to Super Psyched.
I'm super psyched to be here.
I'm so glad, Jeff. So, gotta ask, as a child, when you were imagining your future as a grown-up, what did you have in mind?
I didn't have this in mind, being DA. I was thinking, I played a lot of sports growing up, and I imagined being a professional athlete. I was going to be a baseball player or a soccer player or later a tennis player. And gradually, one by one, as I got older, those dreams disappeared. And when I was in high school, I just thought, well, I should go to college because that's what most of the kids that I knew were doing. And at some point I thought about being a lawyer, but I thought about it because I liked to do public speaking. So I thought, oh, well, that's what lawyers do. And I thought that because that's what they did on television. So I thought that's what they did. And I thought most lawyers don't do public speaking and don't go to court, but I didn't know that. I was always kind of interested in politics and student government. So I don't know, I thought maybe I would do something in politics or government, but I didn't have anything really specific in mind. And then I thought for a while about being a rabbi when I was in college. I thought that would be interesting. And, you know, you help people and there's a public speaking component to it and you're a teacher. And so I thought about that. And you know, ultimately, I decided to go to law school. And again, I just thought, oh, I'd like to be the kind of lawyer that tries cases because that's what lawyers do. And while in law school, then I gravitated towards criminal law for a few reasons. One, because I understood it better than the other kinds of law I was studying. So in law school, there's a lot of real estate and corporate and securities and probate and wills and trusts. And I didn't have a natural affinity for those subjects. It didn't come naturally to me. It didn't come easily, and I didn't understand it very well. Whereas criminal law was about people and why they do the things that they do. And if they do something wrong, how do you show that? What's the best way to hold somebody accountable? How do you help the victim? So those things just spoke more to me. And I did different internships in law school and found that I liked being a prosecutor the best. I have a lot of good friends. Some of my best friends are criminal defense attorneys, but I just wasn't oriented that way. I felt more strongly about trying to help someone that was the victim of a crime, hold someone accountable for committing a crime, and thereby uphold the values and norms that we have in our society. So that's sort of how I started thinking about being a prosecutor and wanted to be one.
You know, it's really funny when you look at you today, nobody could possibly imagine that you were at one point a fledgling attorney. And I'm guessing that as you were transitioning from law student into attorney, that you were new at bat and maybe a little bit of shaky leg syndrome, something also known as imposter syndrome. Like, am I really a lawyer? Am I just playing one on TV? And I'm wondering, when you were just getting started, what was that like when you were just new?
I definitely had shaky legs at the beginning. My first 2 years as a lawyer, I was not at the DA's office. I was working in law firms in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. And I felt very much like an imposter. I don't belong here. I'm not good at this. And I'm working hard. I'm trying my best, but I'm just not really connecting to what's happening. I'm not doing well. And I had wanted to be a prosecutor for a while, and it was hard to get hired as a prosecutor. This was back in the mid 90s. The economy wasn't so great, but eventually I did get hired as a deputy DA in Santa Clara County and immediately thought, oh, this is for me. I made friends here in the office. The other places that I worked, the law firms, it's not that the people weren't nice at the law firms, some weren't, but I wasn't really friends with any of them. We didn't have similar interests. I came to the DA's office. I made a number of good friends. And so that was one way that I felt that this was more where I belonged. But certainly, even when I was starting out as a deputy DA, I was very nervous, and particularly about trying cases. And, was I presenting the evidence in the right way? Was I asking the right questions? What if the jury comes back not guilty? Am I going to be fired? What's going to happen? And so I was nervous at the beginning. And I also just took things a lot more personally than I as later in my career. So, and by that, I just mean that I would take things that defense attorneys said or did, I would take that personally, as opposed to this is just their job. They're representing their client. And I would be kind of offended when defendants lied on the witness stand. That really offended me. And it showed, in my presentation. And, eventually I just recognized that wasn't the best way to present my case, and that my job is to try to demonstrate to the jury that the defendant's lying, not to pass a moral judgment on the defendant for lying or to get angry at the defendant.
Right.
So, I got better as I went along, and that was a process of trial and error and making mistakes, but learning from those mistakes. That was important.
I'm guessing that your anxiety and vigilance really served you during your fledgling years, and that it helped you actually become better at what you do. And I really found myself laughing when you were describing taking things personally. I remember when I was a budding clinician and I was working with gang affiliated teens, and I had a really good connection with one of them. And after several sessions, I learned he had been lying the entire time. And I went into my supervisor's office, Dr. Jorge Wong, and I said, he lied to me. And he said, he fell on the floor. He started laughing. He said, Adam, what did you expect them to do? That's what they do. But we had a thing. It was going to be like a Goodwill Hunting. But, I just found myself laughing when you were describing just taking things personally and how crucial it is to not do that and how hard it is to not do that.
On the one hand, you care very much about what happens. And so, I cared deeply about the cases I was prosecuting and wanted the jury to see it in the right way. I wanted this defendant held accountable. I wanted to help the victim. But sometimes that caring, you can care too much, or you can care in not the right way, and it can affect your judgment and affect your performance. And so I just learned to try to channel my passion in a more productive way, and not in a way that, just made me less effective, and not in a way that also made it harder for me to do this. So there's a lot of conflict during the day when you're prosecuting cases, and to try to manage that conflict in a positive way, in a way that's not debilitating, is important.
I couldn't agree more. And, I'm taken by the idea that in law, I believe there's a fairly high attrition rate amongst people who would get their JD and then serve as lawyers and then leave. And yes. I love the fact that you found your ilk. You first started in LA in, it sounds like, a for-profit law firm, decided to pivot, come to Santa Clara County, join the DA department, and you found your ilk here. And that has been very diagnostic and prognostic in terms of like, this is my place.
Yeah, I think if I'd stayed working in law firms, I would be a very unhappy, bitter, overweight person and just lonely and negative. And I think that part of how I knew that the DA's office was for me was the people around me were people that I liked and was friendly with. Secondly, the work spoke to me and I understood it. I got the idea of what we were trying to accomplish. And then 3, like anything in life, if you like what it is that you're doing, you're more likely to be better at it. And then when you're better at something, you're more likely to like it more. So it's this kind of virtuous cycle of, I really liked what I was doing. I was good at it and getting better at it. And that just continued to reverberate.
Jeff, I couldn't agree more with that virtuous cycle. And I actually refer to it very endearingly that we become a geek within the profession. We just geek out to the profession and just love it and become really good at it. And I noticed that you have a successful history as one of the finest prosecutors this county has ever seen. And I'm wondering, what was it that you liked most about being the prosecutor?
Well, trying a case in front of a jury is very exciting. It's a high. It's a legal high. Yeah.
It's a legal high.
It's a legal high. I think what I liked so much about actually trying the case was there's creativity. How are you going to present this evidence to the jury? Yes, you have these witnesses. Which order are you going to call them in? Which questions are you going to ask them? How are you going to ask them questions? What kind of exhibits are you going to use? What kinds of photos or tape recordings? How will you present that? So there's a lot of creativity to it. There's also sort of a mastery that you achieve of the facts of the case before the trial. So let's say it's a murder case with 30 witnesses and expert witnesses, eyewitnesses, people from the crime lab, defendants' witnesses that are going to testify. By the time the case is ready for trial, I would know all of the facts about this murder. I just would have a mastery of all the details. And so there's a certain feeling of satisfaction that you get from knowing that. So there's that aspect, then the creativity of presenting it. And then there's the whole psychological part of the trial, which is, how am I going to persuade the jurors to see this evidence the way I see it? Every juror is different. I have a limited amount of information about the jurors that I've learned in the process of selecting them. But how do I craft my presentation? Because ultimately, it's not about what I think at all. It's about what the jurors think. How can I get them to see it my way? And then the other thing that happens during a trial is unexpected things happen. Witnesses say things that you didn't expect them to say. Defense attorneys make arguments you didn't expect them to make. And so then there's that being able to think on your feet aspect of it that I really enjoyed as well. And how can you take the curveballs that happen and turn them into positives for what you're presenting? And what I found is that the better you know the case to begin with, the better able you are to deal with the unexpected things that happen and make it almost look natural the way that you responded to something that you didn't know was going to happen. So the trials brings out all kinds of skills in a person. And it's also just physically demanding. A long trial that's 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, or sometimes, 3, 4, 5 months is just something physically demanding as well. And I just enjoyed the whole process of it. It was kind of a combination of speech and debate and acting and being in a sporting event, almost like a tennis match or playing basketball, just that there's things that happen. So it's something I really enjoyed. And then on top of all of that, it's real. This is a real thing. Like somebody was really murdered or raped or had their house broken into. This person on trial did it, and the victim and the community is hoping and expecting that justice will prevail. And so there's a lot of pressure that you feel to put forth the case as well as you can and for the jury to come to the right result. So I loved it. I really loved it.
I want to just kind of leapfrog on your idea of the physical demands of your job, both as a prosecutor and now as a DA. And what the listener cannot see is that Jeff is in ridiculously good physical shape. And I know from previous conversations that you do take care of your body, even if you're feeling sick, that you'll get on the machine and you'll work out. Can you just describe a little bit about how you take care of your body so that you can perform at this level, as well as when you don't really feel like doing it?
I think that, and you'll know this better than I will, but I think most people intuitively understand there's a connection between how their body feels and how they feel, between the mind and the body. And so if I don't work out before I come to work, I just don't feel as good that day. Whereas when I do work out, I'm not saying that's a tonic or a magic elixir and therefore the rest of the day is great, but definitely working out helps my mood and I feel more energetic, and I just feel a little calmer as well. So on the one hand, I feel more energetic, but I also feel calmer and able to kind of handle the things that are going to come at me during the day, whether when I was a deputy DA or as a DA. So I just think that the physical is very important and to try to take care of yourself, because, in any kind of job, there is a physical demand to it. I mean, there's trying cases is constantly getting up and sitting down and schlepping all these files to court and back, and then having a lot of intense experiences. And if you're not taking care of your body, you're not taking care of yourself, and you're not going to be able to do this over the long period. I'm not burned out. I don't want to burn out. And I don't think that burnout is a sign that burnout happens to people for many different reasons, but it certainly is something that I wanted to avoid. Like I work hard, but I don't want to burn out. I want to work in a way that allows me to work long term and to be productive. So I think taking care of your body is essential to that.
I couldn't agree more. And to your point, I've heard it said that if we could put the benefits of physical exercise into a pill, it would be the number one prescribed pill in the nation, if not the world. And another just a weird artifact is a commonly prescribed medication for anxiety is actually one that is not intended for anxiety itself. It is actually intended for nerve pain. And by reducing the nerve pain, because of those nerve signals that we get, we're less likely to feel anxious. That's gabapentin, a very old nerve pain drug, seems to have a great off-label use for anxiety. So to your point about taking care of your body and how it relates to your mind, I could not agree more.
Everybody just has this experience of you're at work and there's some difficult project that you're working on. You're trying to write a paper or you're trying to figure something out, and you're a little bit stuck. And, you can sit there at your desk or have a standing desk and stand there, for minutes and hours trying to, quote, power through it. But sometimes it helps if you just get away from it for a few minutes and take a walk. So definitely there's anybody around the county government building, sees me walking around it quite often. I'm on the phone, I'm walking around. I feel like I make better decisions and I'm able to come to decisions or figure things out if I'm moving. And so having a meeting where I'm walking with someone and they're either walking with me or I'm talking on the phone while I'm walking to them, I find that relaxing and I find that I make better decisions and I'm actually more present.
To your point, I believe that people like Ben Franklin and Albert Einstein did the same type of thing, to just walk away from it and walk and just re-engage later and see it anew, hitting that refresh button. Something that you were indirectly speaking about was that in geeking out, this work is meaningful and challenging. And I'm using those two words very intentionally because they seem to be the two key ingredients towards being in the zone, something that we call in psychology flow, a flow state. And you seem to be in flow much of the time, which is predictive of it being a good fit for your profession. I find myself wondering about the rabbi piece. You'd considered becoming a rabbi, and you seem to pour your entire soul into your work, whether it was as a prosecutor or now as a DA. And there may be a case to say that you're working some of your rabbinic muscles in your duty as DA.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that one thing that I think everybody needs, or one thing that I very much like about being the DA and what I liked about being a deputy DA, is that combination of doing something that was meaningful and challenging. So I found there was an innate and important meaning in the work that I would have been doing as a prosecutor and now as the DA. Meaningful to me, and I think objectively meaningful. And also that it's challenging, like it's hard. It's not as though it's easy, but because it's meaningful, I want to engage in that because I want to try to, try to get it right. So I think that combination is important for whatever job somebody has. And when they have those two things, I think they are happier. I don't think I would be happy if the work of being a prosecutor was easy. If the jury always convicted or the judge always ruled my way or whatever policy initiative I'm trying to, put forth as the DA, if everybody agreed with what I said immediately, it wouldn't be as interesting. It wouldn't be as fun. And so the fact that there's pushback and resistance and argument is part of that challenge is really important, frankly, and makes it even more worthwhile. I think in terms of the rabbi piece, I was a philosophy major in college, and I focused a lot on moral philosophy. What does it mean to live a good life? How do you figure out everybody wants to do the right thing? Almost everybody. But what is the right thing to do in a situation? How do you figure that out? And that I just have always been very interested in that. And I think being a rabbi, or for me, a rabbi, for others, a priest or a reverend, the idea of trying to help other people live a good and meaningful life and do the things that are right and try to help them figure out what's right in a complicated situation is something that I've always been interested in. And I think that the rabbi piece of what I do as the DA, I would say, is I think a lot about what I do now, particularly as the DA, as what am I doing that's helping the community get better? What did I do today that helped people find more justice, find more safety, find more dignity? And so I think that one of the things that a rabbi does is to try to help his or her congregants make themselves happier through finding meaning in their lives, and make the world better through their service. So I think that's some of the ways in which the earlier interests I had as being a rabbi have combined with what I do as the DA now.
Very cool. And, as you're talking about your approach, you strike me as a paragon of an idea that I hold in very high regard, a servant leader. And that is a person who focuses primarily on the growth and well-being of the people that they're serving. That is the focus. And, I see you as a servant leader in the political and justice realm, and yet no one rises alone. I'm wondering, who have been the role models and mentors who have shaped the way you lead?
You're absolutely right that nobody rises alone. Nobody makes it on their own. Everybody had help, and often a lot of help. I think that concept of servant leader is something that I was introduced to shortly after I was elected. One of the prosecutors here gave me a book that was a long parable about a man trying to find meaning in his life and going away to, on a church retreat to try to understand why he was not happy, and realizing that through service, he would be a better leader, and would be a happier person. And this had kind of, sort of undertones and overtones of Christianity. And so I found that very interesting idea. Mm. And I do think that the paradoxical thing that I'm sure you see in people that come to talk with you is that if you focus on your happiness and you think a lot about trying to make yourself happy, you will almost invariably not be happy. And that's
so true.
If you can try to focus on, honestly, on just helping other people or trying to make things better in some realm, you'll be happier personally. Yep. So I've thought about that a lot and tried to practice that. So, in terms of role models that I've had for let's say the leadership style that I have, I've had a number of role models and mentors. I think one is certainly my parents, in the sense that they both taught me both through what they said and through example to treat everybody respectfully. Whatever station they were in life, whether it was, a janitor or a bus driver or the doctor or the mayor, to treat everybody respectfully and to be kind to everyone. Not to be a pushover, but to be kind, to take an interest in people and their problems. So, both of my parents, very much were aware of who my friends are and who their parents were and what was happening with those families, and, whether somebody was sick and to send them a card, or somebody had lost a job. Maybe there's somebody that my parents knew that could help them get a job. So to just be interested in other people. So that's definitely something that I learned and I saw that my parents do, that I've tried to incorporate. I think when I joined the DA's office, the first supervisor I had was very impactful. His name is Neil Kimball. And he was the kind of person that when you came to him and said, I don't know what to do in this situation. On the one hand, there's this, on the other hand, there's that. Neil would not just give you the answer and say, okay, the answer is this, or read this case, it will tell you the answer. He would really try to get me to think through it for myself. And he would ask questions to try to get me to figure it out on my own. And often the questions that I had for him were, sort of ethical questions about what we could do as a prosecutor in some certain situation. And one of the things that he said to me was, he said, well, here's the line between, he to me sounded like a rabbi when he said this. He said, and he very much could be something from the Talmud. He said, here's the line between what is permitted and what is not permitted. Here's the line between what's ethical and what's not ethical. You have to decide how close to the line you want to get. And so I thought that was his whole approach, just helped me be a better prosecutor, in that, he really encouraged me to try to figure these things out for myself. It's not that he didn't give guidance, but he didn't just give the answer. And what he was trying to teach was, look, I'm not always going to be there, Jeff. You're not always going to have a supervisor right next to you telling you what to do in this situation. Like, a lot of things you're going to have to figure out on your own. And I'm trying to give you the tools for you to figure these things out on your own. So that had an enormous impact on me. And then I would just say, look, there's historical figures that I'm very fond of and that I try to model myself after in some ways. So I'll give you two. The first is a football coach, Vince Lombardi, Packers football coach. And, I've read so many books about him, and many of his players thought of him as not a football coach, but as a father figure, as a rabbi, or a priest, or as somebody that was a life coach and that helped them succeed, not just as football players, but in life. Many of his former players went on to run successful businesses and to be successful citizens because he was so interested in them. And very much he treated everybody fairly. He had a lot of Black players on his team, and he was very clear, and this was during the 1960s, our colors are green and gold. They're not black and white, and everybody's going to be treated fairly, and everyone's going to rise and fall on their merit. He also believed very much in hard work and giving your all. And really what I took from him and his teachings was, if you do your best, you're a winner. If you do your very best, you're a winner. He often said, we never lost a game. We just ran out of time.
I love that.
We just ran out of time. Eventually we would win. And I think that also, I never really lost a case. I just needed another witness, maybe a different jury. But just if I'd done my best in the case, then I was a winner. And I definitely want people that work for me in the DA's office to feel that way. You can't control what the jury does. All you can control is what you do. And if you prepared well and you put on the case to the best of your ability, you succeeded. And if the jury doesn't agree with you, the jury doesn't agree with you, but you did your very best. And that's what's important. And then the last historical figure that I'm really fascinated by and tried to model is Harry Truman. He was the underdog, and he's not tall or handsome, and he was an accidental president, and people had low expectations for him. And yet he did incredible things, and he was very straightforward and took responsibility and was honest. I admire a lot about him. After he was president, he was not a wealthy man, never a wealthy man. And after he was president, he went back to Missouri, and he was offered positions on all of these corporate boards, and that would help him make money, and he needed to make money. But he refused all of those things. And he said, look, they don't want me on the board. They want the president on the board. And the president's not for sale. The president belongs to the people. And so I just try in my own way to model myself after his humility, his plain spokenness, and his lack of ego in terms of making decisions. I don't always succeed, but he's certainly been a model for me. And the phrase that he's famous for, which comes from playing poker actually, is the buck stops here, meaning ultimately you're responsible. And so I take that responsibility seriously. And when mistakes happen in a DA's office and with 200 prosecutors, we make mistakes every day. Ultimately, I'm responsible as the DA for that. And I take that seriously. If I get the credit when good things happen, then I get the blame when bad things happen. And I accept that.
Wow, I just need to paraphrase many of the bullet points that you threw down because they were so good. You talked a little bit about treating everybody with dignity and kindness, not being a pushover, but I can't help but think about the theologian Martin Buber and his idea of I and thou versus I and it. I and thou, well, I'll start with I and it. I and it is treating people like a thing or almost like an ATM, whereas I and thou recognizes that this is another human being. They're spiritual. They deserve dignity.
Yeah, to treat people not as a means to an end.
Right.
Which is often in our day-to-day life, we are in situations where we're treating people as a means to an end. Sometimes, like a trivial example, I go to Subway and I order a sandwich and the person makes the sandwich and I pay them. And, that's a transactional relationship. But of course, even in that mundane encounter, there's a way to treat the person that's making the sandwich as an end in and of themselves,
right,
as a human being that, hey, hi, how are you? How's your day? Like, it doesn't cost me anything to smile and to say that and to treat this person as more than somebody who's just making, my sandwich.
Absolutely.
So I think that the more we can do that, honestly, the happier we are.
You're absolutely right. The science on happiness shows that we are happier, to your point, when we step outside of ourselves. When we spend too much time inside of ourselves, we run the risk of ruminating and thinking about bad things. Some other things that you actually talked about were that come actually out of positive psychology is an explanatory style, explaining an event, the Vince Lombardi way of saying we ran out of time, we would have won. That's actually very good for our mental health. You would have won that court case if you just had one more witness, and having that rather than seeing it as a loss. And last but not least, I can't help but think of JFK, who I'm going to paraphrase poorly, but he basically was describing in our pursuit to get to the moon, we do it because it's hard. That's why it is good. And I think of you now as really the embodiment of doing things because they're hard.
Honestly, something that's easy, first of all, it may, I'm not saying that necessarily it's not important, but in order to change the status quo in any field that you're working in is hard. And it's hard like there's a lot of forces keeping things as they are. And so if you want to change that, it is going to be difficult. And if it wasn't, it would have already been changed. You know, the other way I sort of think about this is a lot of the decisions that I have to make during the day, the choice is not, oh, here's a great option and here's a terrible option. Okay, that's easy. I don't need to make that decision. Other people in the DA's office will make that. The decisions that come up to me are more, this decision is really crappy and this one sucks. So which one are we going to choose? So, you know, I think that there is a value in trying to work on something that is difficult and something that where you may fail the first several times. Because one of the things that we really have tried to instill in the DA's office, we're not trying to fail. Like our goal is not to fail. Our goal is to get better. And so to try to see the failures as setbacks, but not as, oh no, we're done, we've totally failed, we've lost, but to try to see what we can learn from our failures. And one of the things, of course, we can learn from those is, all right, well, let's try something different. But that way didn't work. Now we know that way didn't work. So we've learned something. Let's try this a different way. The other thing that's so important about that is I'm trying to teach people to be resilient. We don't just go, wait, you lost a case, the jury convicted. You don't quit. You don't, not come back to work the next day. We'll try it again. We'll try it differently next time. So to try to teach people to be resilient, because we're all going to fail at different points in our life. We're not always going to succeed, but there's so many things we can learn from our failures. And I think one of the things that's unfortunate is sometimes we don't learn from the failures. We've already failed. Why don't we at least get the benefit of learning from that? And the one thing that you said about sort of how we explain a situation, another way I think of that is, what is the narrative? What is our narrative? What is the story we tell ourselves? And so, right, what I like about Vince Lombardi is the story he's telling the team is, we're not losers. No, we just ran out of time. Like eventually we are going to succeed. We are going to be a great football team. And so what is the narrative we tell ourselves? The narrative is sometimes the juries don't agree with us. We do our very best. We don't always succeed, but you know what? We try again. That's our narrative. We get up and we try again, and we will succeed. So, it's a little bit how to experience things in life. We work with a lot of crime victims, but I don't want prosecutors in the office to think of themselves as victims if the jury disagrees with them, or a witness gets mad at them, or a police officer yells at them. Like, don't think of yourself as a victim. Think of yourself as somebody who is learning and growing and evolving and getting better. And I understand that people are going to make mistakes. What I want is to not keep making the same mistakes. Go out and make a new mistake. That's better than making the same mistake over and over.
That's so important. We are meaning-based creatures, and this is really something that really differentiates humans from perhaps other animals, that we really attribute profound meaning to a thing. And the meaning that we walk away with is really up to us to control the narrative. And I think you're spot on. I got to ask, in 2010, you ran to become the DA. And I was wondering, that's a pretty bold move, especially when there's been an incumbent for a long time. And I'm wondering what caused you to have the conviction to go for it, And what was it like to run?
So the decision to run took a while. There were concerns with how the office was being run, and there were a lot of people in the office that were complaining about how things were being run and how they could be run better. And I went to lunch with people that were complaining about these things. I complained about these things. And then at some point, I just kind of realized either put up or shut up. I mean, stop being a critic and do something about it. It's easy to sit and diagnose what the problems are. I mean, that it was obvious what the problems are. The question is anybody going to do anything about it? That's the hard part. And I just didn't want to be I don't think of myself as a complainer. It's not that I don't go home and complain and vent to my wife about things, but my kind of mindset is more like, okay, well, what can we do to make things better? And so just after a while, I just decided I'm sick and tired of just hearing people complain. I'm going to do something about this. And I took a number of steps and talked to a lot of people to see, is it possible? Could I run? How would I run for office? I didn't know how to do that. I hadn't been living my life to run for DA. I was happy prosecuting cases in court. But I talked to a lot of people and thought there was a path that I could win. But even before a path that I could win, I just was trying to figure out, could I run a good campaign? What is a political campaign? And could I run a good campaign? And once I convinced myself that I could run a good campaign, then I said, okay, I'm going to run. And there's a reason they call it running for office, because you're just running from place to place. I mean, I just was running from this event to that event and this phone call to that meeting. So it was just a lot of literally running from place to place. And it was hard. It's not easy to, go to an event where there's 100 people that you've never met before, and you're trying to meet people and talk to them and convince them to support you or to listen to you. I'm like anyone else. I'm more comfortable around people that I know who are my friends. So it made me get out of my comfort zone and meet people and talk to people who I wouldn't have met or talked to otherwise. I liked that. I like people. I'm interested in people. And I also, at some point, I didn't know whether I was going to win or not. I mean, I didn't know. But after running for a few months, it took a few months to figure out, is this how you run for, am I doing the right thing here? Part of the stress was I'm working really hard, but I don't know if this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Should I have gone to that event and not that one? Should I call this person? Should I run this? What should I do? After a few months, I thought, okay, I'm doing what I should be doing, and it seems to be going well. And by that, I mean, I would have events, people would come, they'd contribute to my campaign. I got some favorable publicity. It seemed to be going well. I didn't know if I would win, but honestly, by the time election night came, I had a tremendous peace. And part of that was physical, I'm just exhausted. So I'm gonna fall asleep tonight, and I just am so exhausted. So part of it was that, but I also had felt a little bit like at the end of a case I presented in court where, you know what, I found all the evidence that there was. I prepped the witnesses. I presented the case as well as I could. I made the right arguments. It's in the jury's hands now. There's nothing more I can do, but I'm at peace with myself because I did my best. Like Vince Lombardi said, I'm a winner because I gave it my best. And so that's really how I felt on election night. And, then I won. So that was exciting. And, it was a very close election. I won by, 1% of the vote, maybe less than 1%. And, the funny thing is, I don't know how that happened because since I was elected, I haven't met anybody who didn't say they voted for me. So I don't everybody said they voted for me. So I think it must have been a landslide. Something happened at the registrar's office. So,
who are these people who didn't vote for you?
Yeah, I haven't met one yet. So, But so that was very exciting. And of course, it's easier for me to say now that, that was a good experience running for office because I won. I recognize that. But I do encourage people, if they are interested, for the school board or other kinds of offices, it was a great experience. It was a very American experience. I met all kinds of people I wouldn't met before, really wonderful people. And the experience I had, which I think others have, is while there were a few people along the way who disappointed me, who I thought would support me, who didn't, for every one person who I thought would support me and didn't, there were 10 that I had no idea would support me and did. I mean, that was really the experience that I had. And I tried, because I think we're all wired to focus on the negative. Every time I get myself thinking, oh, I can't believe so-and-so didn't help me, I try to remember, yeah, but there's these other 10 people you met who are wonderful people who did help you, and to try to focus on that. So the experience was tremendous. And I just felt I really grew as a person and as a leader in doing it.
You're speaking to a phenomenon that is called the negativity bias, and we are wired to focus on the negative. The two Muppets who are kind of the old curmudgeonly men who are ragging on the performance. If you remember those guys, that's kind of how our brain works. And it's actually lower in our brain neurophysiologically. It's more in the limbic system, deeper down. And for us to kind of go to the upper floor, to the higher cortex, like you were just describing, is actually a fairly long distance neurophysiologically. But I'm geeking out here. But one of the other things that I just loved that you said was, irrespective of the outcome, you would have been a winner in your mind because you tried your best. And I also know that the Little League pledge of trying your best, that actually is something you've taken to heart.
I really mean that, yes, while my life would be different in some ways if I'd lost, I probably wouldn't be working here anymore. But in other ways, my life would not have been different. I would have the self-esteem that I have for myself, the respect I have for myself. I would have had that whether I won or lost. My parents, my wife, my family were very proud of me and thought that I'd run a good race. I felt like I'd done my best. And one of the things I was very worried about during the campaign was that I would let people down, that there's all these people that are supporting me and that are contributing to my campaign, that are putting their careers on the line, who worked in the DA's office, who are going to suffer negative consequences if I lose because of their support for me. And I didn't want to let them down, not in the sense of what the outcome would be, because everybody knows, who knows what the voters are going to decide. But I didn't want to let them down in terms of running a bad campaign. Like, oh, they supported me, but I didn't really do a good job as a candidate. And so by the end of the campaign, I felt that I'd done right by everybody. That was part of why I had peace about that. Like, I did my best and we ran a good campaign. It's going to be what it's going to be, but I had that peace about it. So I think I think everybody goes through that. They don't want to or at least speaking for me, I didn't want to let other people down, and I didn't.
That's amazing. And that was really at the, forefront of your mind. And I'm just thinking about a hallmark of psychological wellness, and that is cognitive flexibility, which means basically the ability to think differently, the ability to learn. You have learned from so many different sources, including Christianity, and you've learned probably from the rules of tennis. And I'm absolutely sure from having married so well from your wife, who also serves in a very high capacity for law. But I want to just talk a little bit about an unexpected place from which you learned and your cognitive flexibility was profoundly challenged. Your father survived the Holocaust and was a prisoner in a concentration camp for 3 years in the 40s, just as a child. And you visited Germany and saw the penal system. I believe you visited somewhere around 2015, 2016, saw the penal system of modern Germany. And in addition to having many feelings about revisiting a place that had incurred so much harm to your family, you were so impressed with their system and its effect on society, so much so that you gave a TEDx talk that has been watched by over 2 million people about the sophisticated penal system in Germany. What are some of the things that the German system does well, and what can we learn?
So I've definitely learned a lot as DA from reading widely, from visiting other places, whether that's other countries like Germany or within the United States, and seeing things done differently, how things could be done better. I found that to be helpful, not just for me, but for others in my office who I've brought. And it also just kind of goes back to an idea of we're trying to encourage the members of the DA's office to always be learning and to be thinking about better ways to do things, and not to have the idea that if we do something differently now, it means we were wrong before. No, it means that we've learned a better way to do something, and isn't that terrific? So in terms of the Germany trip, I got a phone call inviting me to go on this trip to Germany with some other prosecutors in the United States, a couple of governors, some prison directors, the people that run state prison systems in various states in the United States, like Tennessee, Washington, Connecticut. Those prison directors came. And then some activists, both from the left and the right, about criminal justice reform. We also had a convicted murderer on the trip, Shaka Singh, who'd been released from custody and really had come out a changed person. And then 60 Minutes, followed us. So it was it was a big
it was a motley crew.
Yeah, it was a very motley crew. Exactly. So I asked, what's the purpose of the trip? And they explained it. And I said, okay, let me think about it a little bit. And let me do a little bit of reading about the German system. And I called my parents and said, I'm thinking about going to Germany to learn about, their system. And my mother said, what the blank are you doing? Like, what are you thinking? Well, I'm not going there to forgive or forget, but I'm going there to learn. There may be some things they have to offer. And I talked to my dad about it. I said, you want to come with me on the trip? And he said, no, that's okay. I've already been there.
That is so rich.
He said, yes, I've already seen Germany. We're good. But he said, no, go. So I went, and it was an incredible experience. So one, just going with this group from the United States, who were a combination of prosecutors and prison directors and other elected officials and academics and so forth. So just the learning that went on in the week that we spent together on this trip was remarkable. And I learned a tremendous amount that way. And then, of course, while I had done a lot of reading about the German system before I went on the trip, it's something else when you experience something in person and you're actually on the ground. I'd read about what the prisons were like, but then to experience it was very powerful. So there's a fundamental commitment in Germany to the dignity of the individual. And the first clause in the German Constitution says that the number one responsibility, the thing you put first, is the most important thing. Sort of like in our, we say, we the people, that is the most important thing. In Germany, it says the number one responsibility of government is to protect and to safeguard the dignity of the individual. It is to safeguard human dignity. I mean, that's how it's translating into English, obviously. So that's fundamental. And that plays out through all aspects of their society, including the prison system. So to see prisons where the inmates wore their own clothes and cooked their own meals, which is not the case in our system, was remarkable. And I'd ask, why do you do this? And they said, well, when they're not in prison, they're going to wear their own clothes, right? They're going to cook meals for themselves. So why wouldn't we want them to learn those skills and to live that way here in prison? Because our purpose here in Germany is we want to release them and have them successfully reintegrate back into society. So we're trying to prepare them for that. And one of the things about the American system that you see is, of course, American inmates are dressed in uniforms. And it's like giving them an identity as a prisoner. And the Germans were like, we don't want them to have an identity as a prisoner, as an inmate. We want them to have an identity as an individual, as a German citizen, as an individual. So we want them to wear their own clothes. And one of the things that we've gotten not right in America is the way that prison culture has influenced culture on the outside. So why do young men in certain cities in America wear their clothes baggy? Why do they wear their jeans low? Well, that's because in prison, you wear a uniform and you don't get a belt because a belt is considered something that's dangerous and you could hang yourself or hurt someone with the belt. So the clothes that you're wearing sag. So your jeans or whatever you're wearing in prison, the jumpsuit you've got, it sags. So wait a second. Why would we want the culture of prison to become something that's imitated on the outside? That's the last thing that we want in our society. So to see that in Germany was interesting, to see the emphasis on rehabilitation, the emphasis on preparing inmates to reintegrate. And by the way, this was something that I didn't expect. The German prisons are nice places to work. And I mean that. They're nice places to work. It's clean. The staff that work in the prisons, to be a correctional officer in a German prison is a very good job. It requires a lot of training. It's looked up to in the society. They're not really jail guards. They're really more what we would call probation officers. Their training is more about psychology and social skills and helping people succeed, and a lot less about physical control. It's not about how to handcuff somebody, physical control. It's really about being more of a counselor and modeling good behavior. So the people that work in the prisons, they wear professional clothes like I wear. The wardens, the correctional officers, they're dressed professionally, and it's a pleasant environment to work in. And the German folks that ran the prison said, it's very important to us that the prison be a nice place to work in. Why? Because we want to attract good people to work in the prison. And if people have a choice, they'd rather work in a nice environment than a not nice environment. Secondly, we think we get better results. We think that the inmates do better if the people who work here like working here, and it's a nice place to work and it's clean. And third, look, we're about human dignity here, not just for the inmates, but for everybody. So whoever has a job should have a job where they're also treated with dignity. So that was a whole idea that I just never considered. And in the jails and prisons that I visited in the United States, that just wasn't the approach. It was more, I'm here to control the inmates and to keep them safe. But I never heard I'm here to help them rehabilitate and get better. And so the level of tension was much lower in the German prisons. It was a more relaxed environment than it was in American prisons. So that was very impactful to me. I think that where the German system was a little bit lacking was not enough focus on crime victims. Now, I'm not to say that they don't focus on crime victims at all. They do. And in fact, in their court proceedings, the crime victim is given their own attorney by the state. And the German word is there's the big prosecutor in the courtroom that represents the state, and the little prosecutor represents the victim's interests. So they do that, but there could be more of a focus on that. I think that's a strength in our system. But it was just a radically different approach. And the other thing about it was, well, it's working. And so by working, I mean, they have very few people incarcerated and they have very low crime. That's what you want. You want low crime and not a lot of people incarcerated. And for a long time in our country, we had the opposite. We had high crime and a lot of people incarcerated. And we had this idea, oh, well, you need to incarcerate a lot of people for a long time in order to have low crime. Turns out that's not true. Just in terms of why it's not true, every other country in the Western world had crime go up a lot in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And then from the early 2000s to today, crime has fallen everywhere in the Western world, everywhere. Canada's a good example because they're our neighbor, they're a lot like us, except they're nicer, right? That's the stereotype of Canadians. And their crime rate went up just like ours did in the 80s and 90s, and then it's gone down just like ours. The difference, their incarceration rate remained the same. They didn't start throwing more people in jail like we did. So the idea that people say, oh, well, crime went down because we threw a lot of people in jail. No, that's not why crime went down. What if there's a lot of things that affect crime? demographics is probably the largest thing that affects crime. And so the percentage of your society of young men between, say, 18 and 35, the higher that percentage is, the more crime we often see. And as our society and a lot of the Western world society has begun to age, crime has gone down. There's other factors. That's not the only one. There's the quality of policing and the size of families. As families have gotten smaller, parenting has gotten better. And that's also led to lower crime. It's not to say that there's no effect that incarceration can have on the crime rate. It's just that you reach a point of diminishing marginal returns after you're incarcerating people at 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 times the rate that everyone else in the Western world is doing. So those are some of the things that I learned in Germany that I brought back with me here. And, there's a lot of changes that have been made based on that. There's certainly resistance to some changes, but that experience was very impactful. And just the last thing I would say about that is I also, after visiting these German prisons, I then went to Bergen-Belsen, where my father and his family, that was the last concentration camp they were held in. And I really had to reflect on this society, Germany, that had done such terrible things to my family and to my people, but yet within a short period of time had really transformed itself in terms of the way it treated its citizens. And so it made me see and believe that while things can always change for the worse, we're wired to sense that as human beings, things can get worse. They also can get better. If Germany can make things better in their society, and in America, we can make things better also. And so we've been on a path the last, I'd say, 10 years or so in our country where we are using more rehabilitation, less incarceration, and the results have been positive.
That's absolutely brilliant. Well, I just have to ask this question. And there's often a gap between what science demonstrates and how we behave individually and as larger human systems, including industry and government. What are some findings from science that are not commonly implemented in the penal system that you'd love to see implemented?
Well, one thing that happens is that what science and data show and what human beings experience are sometimes two different things.
Yep.
So what do I mean by that?
Oh, good point.
So what I mean by that is they ask Americans every year, is crime going up? That's one of the questions Gallup asks, is crime going up? And almost every year, anywhere from 60 to 75% of Americans say crime is higher this year than it was last year.
And that's perception.
And that's perception. And it's not true.
Right.
But it's not true, but that's the perception. And why is that the perception? Well, there's a lot of reasons for it. There's, as you say, we're a little wired towards negativity. That's one reason. Look, another reason is crime is always covered. So in Santa Clara County, if we have 100 murders in a year, that would be a horrible year. And each murder would be covered. There would be so many inches in the newspaper devoted to the 100 murders a year. There'd be so many minutes on local television about those 100 murders. If we have 30 murders a year in Santa Clara County, and this year I think we'll have between 30 and 40 murders, that will get the same, each murder will be covered. It will get the same amount of inches in the newspaper, a little bit more detail, same amount of minutes in the TV news. So you're always going to have the sense that crime is up or there's a lot of crime, even when it's down. Third thing is that I think when people are asked, do you think there's more crime this year than there was last year? Partially they're answering a different question. And the question they're answering is it important to combat crime? Is it important for government and for the police and prosecutors to focus on crime and to try to make it low? You're asking them, is crime going up or down? But what they're hearing is, do I think it's important to combat crime? And so part of what they're answering is, I want you to focus on combating crime. Within the context of prosecutors, while when we provide more drug treatment, mental health treatment, and rehabilitation services to inmates, when they are released, they are then less likely to commit crimes. And so the recidivism rate for people that go through the reentry center in our county is actually quite low. However, who do our prosecutors see? They don't see the person that was a drug addict, that was robbing people's houses, that was committing crimes, but is now cleaned up and has a job, paying taxes, not committing crimes. That person, we never see. We don't see them. We only see the small number of people that keep reoffending. And so it can give us the perception as prosecutors that nobody can change. It doesn't matter what you do. They're going to come back and commit more crimes. We got to lock them up even longer because as soon as they get out, they're going to commit crimes. And that's not true. That's just who we are seeing. And so we're getting a false perception of what the picture is. And so that creates a challenge as the DA to try to show people there are positive examples of people that have changed, to bring people to the office who have gotten out of prison and have cleaned themselves up and are productive members of society. So that's a constant challenge that we have to try to show that to people. And, the other thing that I think is a little bit odd, or I shouldn't say odd, something that I recognize is some people think that their job as a prosecutor is more important if crime is high than if crime is low. And so if crime is low, well, that must mean my job's not as important. So I got to really, focus a lot on crime because people won't think it's important if it's low. No, that's not the case. We're never going to have zero crime. There'll always be some amount of crime. But the value of what you bring is not based on whether crime is high or low. And the last thing, just sort of on this point, I know we're talking about the science and what can make crime go up or down or what people's perceptions are. But there's something else that's very important here, which is just what our conception of justice is. So whether crime is high or low, if somebody's house was broken into, they feel violated. Yeah. They have been violated. Their sense of safety has been shaken. Their possessions have been taken, and they don't feel as personally secure. So whether there were more burglaries last year or fewer burglaries is irrelevant to how that person legitimately feels and has nothing to do with our focus on trying to solve that crime, trying to hold that person accountable who did it, and try to help that victim get back on their feet, get their belongings back, get counseling back. That's something we have to do irrespective of whether crime is high or low. And so that's really what I want to try to encourage our prosecutors. Those individual cases you have, we talk about this, they're meaningful in and of themselves. They're not just a means to an end of this is how we're going to lower crime. Maybe this will help us lower crime. But these cases are important in and of themselves because these are about real people in our community that have been hurt. And we want to try to fix that. We want to try to help them. And I also just think we want to help the defendants that are convicted for a lot of reasons, for human dignity, because it's the right thing to do. But if we can help them, give them the opportunity to succeed, there will be less crime. And that means there will be less crime victims. And that's also important. So that's a little bit how I think about these things.
That's great. And I have my final question. And before I do so, I love when you said about deputy DAs and their perception that almost like Gotham City needs a very active Batman too. Otherwise, they feel like it's less relevant. But the final question is this, Jeff, and I'm so grateful for your time. If you were to just choose one thing that people got from your tenure as DA, what do you hope that would be?
He worked hard, he cared, he listened, and he made things better.
Gorgeous.
That's what I would hope they would take away. He didn't make them perfect. He tried, but he worked hard, he cared, he listened, and he made things better. That's what I hope they would take away.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your wisdom. And this was just great.
It was a pleasure talking to you, Adam. Take it easy.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey, thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe